Hi everyone, Ethan with Beware Beekeeping, and today we're going to go over 15 things new beekeepers should know/do. So if this is your first beekeeping season coming up here, we're going to go through just a list of things that are good to know, good to prepare for, to make sure you're successful in your upcoming season. Number one is probably the most obvious, but you need to get all of your tools and equipment prior to getting your bees. So what you're going to need your beehives themselves, a bee suit, veil, gloves, a smoker, and whatever you're using for your smoker fuel. Whether that is, some people use burlap, others use like oak pellets and stuff like that. Do a little research, figure out which one. I personally use burlap. It's slow burn. It works pretty well in my opinion, but if you want to use alfalfa pellets or something else like that, totally can. As far as the bee suit goes, I would highly recommend not just getting it from Amazon or getting a cheap suit. Where your bee suit's gonna kind of help you out is preventing stings and the level of ventilation. I personally use the 3-layer bee suits. That kind of makes the bees, it's difficult for them to sting through it unless the fabric gets pulled really tight. It has 3 layers of mesh, so it breathes pretty easily, and bees don't really sting through it. If you get some of these cheaper ones, like off of Amazon or something like that, they kind of are more just like a plastic suit and usually pretty hot, tear easily, that sort of thing. So I would highly recommend investing in a good suit. If you haven't bought anything yet, look around. There are sites like Man Lake is kind of one of the go-tos, but they'll do kind of new beekeeper specials where you can get pretty much all of your gear in one go, including your hives with all of the frames, the bottom boards, the covers, and all that stuff. So look around for that prior to buying anything. See if you can get a deal on all that as a bundle. Number two, pretty obvious, but make sure to set up your equipment before getting your bees. Again, pretty self-explanatory, but you don't want to have picked up your bees from wherever you're getting them, whether it's a beekeeper or a local shop in town, something like that. You don't want them to be sitting in their box while you're trying to assemble the boxes, the frames and stuff. That'll take a little bit of time usually. And I would, again, just recommend setting up your apiary. That's what we call your bee yard. And, make sure it's in a good spot that can be easily accessible for you and doesn't have a lot of crazy stuff in it. Again, just make sure you're doing that before you got your bees. It makes it a lot easier when you already have it. You pull the bees in and you can just kind of install them into your hives. So that would be number two. Number three is knowing how to do an inspection and what to look for, how often you need to do them, that sort of thing. I would highly recommend going and taking a class to learn how to do this, or at least plugging in with some local beekeepers. Usually every county has a beekeeper association. Get plugged in with them. I'm sure you could probably find a beekeeper that can show you how to do it if you didn't want to go the class route, or at the very least watch some YouTube videos. There's a lot of good content out there. I would recommend doing that. You can cause a lot of damage to the hive by doing inspections incorrectly. Namely, you can hurt your queen, who, if your queen's struggling, that's going to cause a lot of effects to the rest of the colony. So that would be my suggestion, is really understand how to do an inspection and what you're looking for. Number four, deciding if you want a package, a nucleus, or a nuke, as we call it, or a single story. Now, if you're a new beekeeper, I would recommend either a package or a nuke. A package is really just a queen and about, I think it's 10,000 bees. It's roughly 3 pounds of bees. There's no frames with it, and you pretty much will just take them out of the package and you put them in your beehives. You will have to feed a package because they don't have anything. They don't have any resources. A nucleus, on the other hand, or a nuke, you're getting about 5 frames of resources along with the queen and the bees. So they're pretty much already a up and running hive. You don't have to feed them. It's probably a good idea to anyway. We'll talk about feeding here in a second. But I would recommend those two. The nuke is going to take off much faster in the season than a package. Again, the package, they have to build everything. They don't have any kind of resources. So they're going to be slower in development. And then the nuke's going to take off a little bit quicker. The last one is a single story. That's like a complete bottom box. Sometimes they'll come with the whole set with bottom board and top and all that stuff. And those are good if you kind of know what you're doing. If you get a single story, you're going to have to worry about swarming a lot more and other things like that, because they're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of the other groups, other bundles of bees. Again, as a new beekeeper, I would recommend maybe going towards a package. The reason for it is they grow a little bit slower, so it helps you get accustomed to your bees and seeing how they build out in the process. Last year I did 2 nukes, and that was great, but even with the nukes, I had to worry about swarming after about 5 or 6 weeks. They were already trying to swarm on me. So that would be the only downside to getting a nuke. It does make it a little bit easier, but again, I would kind of recommend for a new beekeeper, go with a package, and it just helps you grow with them. I would also recommend getting 2 hives. If you're thinking, hey, I want to get into this as a new beekeeper, again, I would recommend 2 hives. The reason for it is if a hive starts to struggle, you can cross load resources from one hive to the other. It's pretty common. It just helps keep the hives going. It's pretty common for a hive to hit a snag or stumble a little bit throughout the year, particularly if you're new. But it happens to commercial beekeepers all the time. The rough survivability rate with commercial beekeepers is about 50%. So you need to, it helps just having resources that you can cross load in case one's suffering or hurting a little bit. That way you can help keep both hives going pretty well. So I would recommend 2 hives for that reason. Number 5, learn how to spot a queen and evidence of the queen. Now, why the evidence if you spot the queen? You need to know the health of the queen. So by evidence, we're talking, is she laying eggs? Do you see young larvae? Do you see capped brood? That sort of thing. Namely, the eggs is what you're looking for. You can tell if a queen's been there recently if you see these eggs. They look like little grains of rice. And if they're standing upright, she was just there within a day or so ago. If they're starting to tilt over, you're looking at 2 days. And if they're laying flat, it's been about 3 days. Now, what that tells you is, again, if your queen is present in the hive. Sometimes there might be an issue and the queen is no longer with the hive. Yeah, something happened to her or they swarmed and you don't have a queen in there for the time being. That's what you need to know about the evidence. Now, if you do see a queen, that's a good news. But again, if there's something wrong with her, seeing the queen isn't good enough. You need to see the life cycles of the bees. You need to see the eggs, the brood, all that good stuff, not just seeing the queen herself. It's always a good sign to see the queen. Don't get me wrong. It's always a good sign to see the queen. But you need to make sure you're looking at more than just the queen, looking at the actual status of the hive. Number 6, the stages of bee development. So bees have jobs throughout their life cycle, and those jobs kind of correlate to where the brood is in development as it goes through its phases. We're going to focus mostly on brood development here because I don't want to overload you guys with too much. But the brood, when an egg is laid, it'll be laid upright, and then it'll eventually fall over and then hatch open. That happens in about 3 days. So by day 3 of the egg being laid, it'll pretty much turn into a larvae. The larvae is at the bottom of a cell, and it'll grow and grow and grow until it pretty much fills up that bottom part of that cell. Then the bees will come over and cap it over, and in which case it's going to be a pupae. Now the pupae is going to stay in there for about 2 weeks. The total time from egg to hatching or to emerging out of the cells is, for a female, 21 days. For a male, it's 23 days. And then for a queen, which is a little bit different, she's at 16 days. Now, why focus on this? Well, if you know when you're having bees hatch, that kind of helps you get a good sense of where your hive's going to be in, 2, 3, 4 weeks. The average bee lives about 45 days. So once they emerge out of their cell on, say it's a worker female bee, she'll emerge out of her cell on day 21. She's going to live another 45-ish days. Through that, she's going to go through various jobs. Again, we won't cover it too much, but generally speaking, it'll be cleaning up, feeding the young, then going over to wax production, then going over to foraging. So that's kind of what they do, just in broad strokes. There's a lot more detail to it, but just again, as over broad strokes here, that's what the bee's life cycle is doing. Knowing that helps, again, put things into context of what's going on. So if you are getting a lot of brood, in 20-ish days, you'll start having a lot more bees. And as a beekeeper, again, that's where it helps you just kind of help establish what the health of the hive is doing at that time. Number 7, the pests and parasites of the bees. So there are 3 main ones: the varroa mite, the small hive beetle, and the wax moth. The varroa mites, by far, probably the biggest concern. They're kind of like ticks, but for bees. They'll attach to the larvae as they're growing. When the bees cap over the larvae cell, that's when the mites will actually reproduce. So they'll grow exponentially. So you really have to make sure you're on top of that. And we'll talk about a couple of things here in a second about how to manage that. Small hive beetle is a black beetle that you'll see in the hive occasionally. Them themselves, the adults, aren't necessarily the problem. It's the eggs and the larvae that they lay. They'll start essentially eating through all your supplies, and they'll slime the parts of the hive. The larvae will. And so that's how you have evidence of them. If you start seeing some slime through your hives, that's evidence that you have some small hive beetles. That's not something I have too much here in Central Texas. Small hive beetle just don't really prefer hives that are in direct sunlight. So there is a little bit of planning on your part of, if you can get a good amount of sun on your hive, that should, being the operative word, help reduce your small hive beetles. Other than that, the bees will kind of corral the adult ones, but they won't actually eliminate them. They kind of put them in jail. They'll use propolis, this sticky substance they make, and they kind of hem them in. You could get things like oil traps. They go between your frames, and the bees will actually push the beetles into that. They'll fall in the oil, and that's how they remove them. Again, not for my experience, that's not something I typically have to worry about. Mites, the varroa mites, are much more of a problem. And the third one is wax moths. Now, wax moths aren't a pest per se. They're actually a great indicator of your hive health. If you see wax moths or their larvae, and you'll know it because it'll look like they have spider webs in the hive, and you'll see these little grubs that are in the comb. They'll eat through all of the comb, and again, they make a bunch of kind of spider web looking substance. Wax moths, again, they won't actually eliminate a hive. They're a sign that your hive isn't doing well. The bees have really no problem taking care of wax moths when they're healthy. But when they can't defend their whole area, that's when the wax moths might move in and start eating some of the outer areas of the hive, and the bees don't have enough manpower to remove them. So that, again, they're a pest, yes. They're not something you want in your hive at all, but it's a better indicator that that your hive isn't doing well. So if you see wax moths, that's when you as a beekeeper need to really kind of take a step back, figure out the who, what, when, where, how, all that good stuff, and try to address the situation. And it's always a good step to remove that frame, freeze it if it's got wax moths on it, and then you can give it back to the bees. But yeah, if you see wax moths, that's a sign your hive isn't doing well. Now, going back to the varroa mite, have a plan to treat for varroa mites. They're a pretty heavy problem here in the U.S. We have treatments for them, some natural, some synthetic. There are also plenty of beekeepers out there. If you're not feeling treatments, totally fine. There are techniques to treat for varroa mites more like without having to do chemicals or anything like that. The first and foremost is a thing called drone comb. Drone comb is their bigger hexagon cells that you can get. Usually it's a green frame. And with drone comb, the mites like drones better because the drone's life cycle, they're capped longer so they can reproduce more. So they'll kind of gravitate to those drone cells. But with a drone comb, you let the bees know, hey, this bigger cell, I'm going to put a drone here. So a drone egg gets laid, that cell gets capped over. When they're all capped over, you just take the frame out and then freeze it. It kills the mites and the drones. Again, drones not super helpful to the hive. Again, mostly for mating. So you're not really losing much by having that. So that's probably the first and foremost of how to treat for mites without using chemicals. If that's something you're interested in, there's a whole rabbit hole about that one. So definitely look up if you want to be kind of chemical free treatment, anything like that. You can do that all naturally with techniques like drone comb. Yeah, highly recommend it. I use drone comb even though I do treat, just because the mites can get so bad and so out of hand. Drone comb is a good thing to have, so I highly recommend it. But have a plan, and you'll see here this is just my rough spreadsheet of what I'm planning this year. Really, there's a great tool out here. I'll put the link up to it, but essentially it's a treatment tool of what treatments you should use at certain times of the year depending on the conditions of your hive. Now, all across the US, we all have very different environments and that sort of thing. So I can't say, oh, in April, use this one. Because for me, April is already 90-ish degrees on average. So some treatments I can't use here in Central Texas because it's too hot. Whereas somebody in Illinois, Maine, wherever, they might be able to use this in April. So this is just what I'm using. And also plan on some treatments you say you can't have hive supers on for X amount of weeks, or some are safe to use with hive supers. So just this tool is great. It's the cantilever tool, and I'll put a link to it in the description here. It's a great tool. It just asks you a handful of yes or no questions, and it'll give you some options, and then you can read all the labels on them, which is again super handy. So I highly recommend that tool. Number 8. Now this one's a good one. Is knowing when to add a box to your hive. So let's just give the example. You put a package or a nuke in. They're starting to build up their frames in their current box. When do you need to add another box? Well, the short answer is whenever they filled out 5 to 7 frames of wax. They don't have to have them all filled with things in them, but if they've built the wax and the comb up for 5 to 7 frames, that's when you really want to start looking at adding another box. Another sign is usually you'll see some comb on the tops of the frames. That's kind of a sign that they'll give of like, hey, we need more things to work on, so we're going to try to put comb wherever we can. So if you're seeing, again, 5 to 7 frames filled out, that's when you're like, okay, I need to add another box. Give them another box. If you don't, they may swarm because they don't feel like they have enough space. So that's one of those things you want to kind of stay a step ahead on. It really won't hurt them too much, even if you're a little bit early. Last year on one hive, they were looking really like they were building really quickly, and I was going to be gone for a couple weeks, so I put one on ahead of time, and they built it out just fine. It might have been a little premature for them, but they did fine. So yeah, that one, namely, you just don't want to be too late in giving them an extra box, because if they feel like they're overcrowded, they might just swarm on you, so you get less bees out of the whole process. Number 9. Now, I just mentioned swarming in number 8, and you might, as a new beekeeper, might be wondering what that is and how to spot the signs of it. In short, a swarm is a division of the hive. The queen bee, the current queen you have, and the foragers, about half of the flyers, will go out, leave the hive, and go set up a hive somewhere else. They'll leave, again, half of the bees in the hive, and they'll leave a queen cell that's charged and will usually hatch in or emerge in 3-5 days usually. So that's kind of how that process works. There's 2 things that really cause swarming: the overcrowding in the hive, so not having enough space, and then 2, it's a natural reproduction in the spring typically. So whenever a lot of flowers start blooming and there's a ton of nectar and pollen and things out there that they can gather, they're more likely to swarm. Here in Texas, I have to worry about swarming year-round. Well, not quite year-round, but pretty much from April to October, maybe even November. I've gotten some calls to do swarm removals in late October, that sort of thing. So Swarming is kind of something I always have to worry about down here. Again, this kind of mileage may vary depending on where you live in the US. So how to spot signs of swarming. The first one that is probably going to be the most apparent is if you look out on the front of your hive, if you see bees, a ton of bees out there, and that they're up the side of your frame. Now bees, when they get hot, will do something that looks kind of similar. It's called bearding, where that's when they're just too hot in the hive and they kind of go outside just so they don't have as many bees in the hive generating a ton of heat. So they'll send some outside to just hang off the entrance, that sort of thing. So yeah, noticing the difference between bearding and swarming is a little bit tricky if you're new, but generally speaking, if they're going up the side of the hive, that's generally a sign that they're getting ready to swarm. If you're seeing just a ton of bees flying on the outside of your hive that aren't facing it. Bees will normally do something called an orientation flight. This usually happens, at least here, around 3 in the afternoon, and they'll fly around looking at the hive, so they'll always be facing it. That's new bees learning to fly. So again, it can get a little, just by taking those signs, those ones are a little tricky to find. The more obvious signs are if you're doing an inspection, if you're pulling up frames and you're seeing these swarm cells, they'll be essentially queen cells on the bottom of the frame, and they hang down about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, something like that. When they're building them, they'll be about that size. That's kind of a cue to you, like, okay, hey, they're getting ready to swarm. If you're seeing them fully developed and capped over, that means they're already charged. They're pretty much going to swarm if you don't intervene immediately. Next is, what do you do if you see signs of swarming? So say you open up your frame and you see a bunch of capped swarm cells in there. First and foremost, don't turn the frames sideways. If they're capped over like that, you can actually kill the queen inside if you turn the cell horizontal. So always, if you're looking at them, always look up. Don't flip the frame around or whatever. You want to make sure you keep that frame vertical to not harm the queen larvae inside, or pupae inside. As far as actually dealing with the swarm, there's 2 major methods. I'm only really going to talk about one because the other one's rather complex, but the first one is to just do what we call a split. Now, a split is taking the queen and a couple of frames from the original hive, the one that's about to swarm, put them in a brand new box, empty box. What that'll do is just make the bees think that they had actually swarmed. And particularly if you give them a frame of brood or something in that other box, they'll stick around in that box a little bit more. And again, just kind of build out, like put frames in there, let them build that out, that sort of thing. So you get 2 hives when you had 1. The second method is the demare or demare. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it because it seems like everybody pronounces it a little bit different. This method is essentially moving frames around in such a way that the bees kind of feel like they have swarmed, but you can keep it as kind of one hive. It's kind of a split, it's kind of not. Again, look up videos on how to do the demare method. It's a little complicated. You're probably, if you're looking for the easy answer, it's probably just the split. Now, some people will say, oh, I'm just going to clip the queen's wings or something like that. I don't really recommend that. And if you put like a queen excluder on the bottom of your most bottom box to try to keep her in there, just know sometimes that works, sometimes not. They will try to thin the queen down a little bit, so she might actually slip through those queen excluders. Just something to keep in mind. Again, if you've got charged cells, they're about ready to swarm, so you're going to need to act immediately. And removing the cells will work, but you've got to figure out why they're actually trying to swarm. Are they overcrowded, and are they just going to do it again, or is it just kind of that reproductive thing? But either way, they'll probably feel a little bit better if you do split them or use the demare method. But that's, again, that's a whole different topic. Just know the signs of swarming, mostly so you don't, if you bought a nice new queen, mostly that she doesn't go fly off into a tree, or that some other beekeeper ends up with your queen that you paid your money for. So again, just kind of know how to spot swarms and understand the timeline. It'll take about 2 weeks for them to do that. They won't swarm until they have charged queen cells and that they're getting close to emerging. So from when you see the swarm cells, if they charge them that day, you'd have about 2 weeks. So just kind of understand the timelines for swarming as well. Number 10 is evaluating the health of the queen. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but now I'm going to kind of expand a little bit on what that means. The main way to evaluate the health of the queen is she laying, and what do those brood patterns look like? If you see when they get capped over, if you see that the frame is all just capped brood and just solid from end to end, that's a really good sign. That means your queen's doing really well. If you're seeing that she's trying to do that, but she has a bunch of empty cells here, there, and everywhere, looks like what we call the shotgun pattern, where it looks like, you had a piece of paper and you shot a shotgun shell at it and you got all these holes everywhere. If your pattern looks like that, that's a sign that either the queen isn't doing well or that there's a ton of viruses in the hive that is causing the larvae to die. So that's kind of how you can tell how your queen is doing. How much is she laying and what that pattern looks like. If she's not doing well, she might not be laying a ton, or she might not be laying in a great pattern. Those are things to kind of look out for. Also, just as a side note, if your hive is rather, well, let's say spicy, if they get upset at the smallest thing, replacing your queen can actually do a lot in that regard. Now, there are some instances where it might be environmental. They might be agitated because like a skunk or something is upsetting them. So don't just jump immediately to replacing a queen. But if you've noticed throughout the season, throughout the year, that they are just angry bees, I would recommend considering looking at replacing the queen. Again, they will get a little more defensive, and I use the word defensive specifically when there are less resources around. So towards the end of summer, early fall, winter, that sort of thing, if you open that hive or if you're around the entrance and they start getting agitated, they're probably just being defensive if it's that time of year. Again, I'm talking if there's a nectar flow out there, and for all intents and purposes, they should be fine and happy and calm because they have plenty of resources out there to gather, that sort of thing, and you haven't really upset the hive. You haven't kicked it over or anything like that. And they're just super aggravated. You might want to consider changing the queen. Give it 45 days, let the current bees that are out there die off, and when the new batch comes in, they'll have the temperament of the new queen. That's a quick and easy way to change a spicy hive to be not so spicy. If you need to water down that experience a little bit, that's a good way to do it. Number 11, how to feed bees properly. Now, again, I mentioned at the beginning of this, if you get a package of bees, you're going to want to feed them. There's a couple of ways you can do it. Some are recommended, some not so recommended. Kind of depends on the time of year. The way I do it is probably the simplest. Is I just bought some screen and I put it over the top of my topmost box. Again, if you're not at that, it should be on your bottom box. That's totally fine. And I just take some old Prego jars, or from like spaghetti sauce jars or Alfredo jars, something like that. If you just get the smallest drill bit you have, like usually 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter, and just drill 6, 8, 10 holes in that lid. And then when I put the feed in the jar, flip the jar upside down on the hive, and the vacuum of the gap of liquid on the top will keep it from dripping out, and the bees can go in there and use their little proboscis straw-like thing and suck out the feed. That's an quick and easy way to do it. There's a few ways to feed bees all in all. Namely, what they're going to need is they need carbs. In this case, we make like a syrup. When you hear somebody say feed them 1-to-1, what they're talking about is 1-to-1 parts. So 1 part water, 1 part sugar. That's a pretty thin mix. Again, that's carbs for the bees, and that's what you want to feed during the spring. Again, particularly if it's a new hive, and going into fall and stuff. So that's probably what you're going to feed throughout that time period. In the heart of winter or leading up to winter, you'll want to change it to 2-to-1, so 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. In that case, you'll have to heat up the water to get it to mix well, and that's a little bit thicker. Anytime you're feeding bees, again, that's only carbs, but bees need more than that. They need protein. That's what the pollen serves in the hive. You can get some protein substitutes, and you can get some other additives that are just kind of good vitamins, minerals for the bees. I personally will use a pollen substitute, and then I think it's healthy, Bee Healthy, something like that. I'll put a picture up to it. I forget the name off the top of my head, but it's a feeding stimulant, and they also have a kind of nutrient dense thing that'll help bees, and that's worked really well. My bees have taken that, and they just come firing back. So that's how I would feed bees. So if you get a package of bees, or if you get a new nuke and you put them in your hive, I just bought some screen from Home Depot or Lowe's, whatever you got. Just cut it a little bit oversized so that you can take it on, put it on, take it off pretty easily. And I just put the jars right on top of that. If you have a screen inner top, that works just as well. You can totally do the same thing. What I wouldn't recommend, there are some that are what are called entrance feeders. So at the entrance of the hive, you can plug in a little plastic thing, and essentially works the same way. You put a jar with feed in it and put it at that entrance. Why I don't like that particularly is it can induce robbing when it's late in the season, where other bees are going to go to that feeder and then realize that there's a hive there, and they might go try to take the resources of that hive when, again, this is like kind of late fall, that sort of thing. And if you're going to do open feeding where you'd say want to just put syrup or protein out in a field somewhere, just keep in mind, do it pretty far away from your hives. So if you've got a bit of land, we're talking put them a couple hundred yards, maybe further apart, because you just don't want other bees knowing that your hive is there. So you don't want it to be a place where other bees are coming to your hive. And also just keep in mind, some states prohibit that. So look up your local laws and just make sure you're applying with or complying with all those laws. Number 12, evaluating the hive by looking at the entrance. Now, this isn't something you're going to get right away. Again, as I mentioned with the swarming, prior to swarming and bearding look a little bit different. There are some key points there, but overall, looking at the entrance of your hive before you open it up can give you a general sense of how they're doing. Case in point, if it's springtime and you're seeing them going in and out, obviously there's a nectar flow. If if it's fall, late fall, nothing's blooming and you're seeing a lot of them go in and out, that might be evidence of robbing. So things like that. Knowing what time of year it is, what you should be expecting to see, and then what you actually are seeing, using that as kind of a comparative analysis is a great thing to understand as a new beekeeper. So as I mentioned, in a nectar flow, namely early spring, early summer to midsummer, probably around, again, depends on where you live, but for us is around mid-June is when it'll start kind of slowing down. If you can't count the number of bees coming and going, that's a great sign. That's, again, generally speaking, that they're just out there collecting everything. It'll start slowing down until the point where you can kind of count them about one a second or whatever. That's kind of normal. Again, I mentioned the swarming versus bearding. That tells you, okay, hey, are they just hot? Are they actually getting ready to leave? So understanding kind of what that entrance activity is telling you. And also, again, just observe it because you can learn a lot. There are bees that will stay on the ground in front of your entrance and they'll go up to every other bee and they're checking to see if they smell like that colony. Again, this is kind of one of their preventative robbing measures, right? It's a security guard standing at the door. They're checking everybody's ID as they're coming and going, just to make sure that they're not a foreign colony. And if they are, well, then they fight. So, and then that kind of leads into, and when it becomes robbing season, if you're seeing a lot of fighting, and it's very interesting to watch them fight, or if you're seeing a lot of really shiny bees. The way bees will fight, they'll actually, if somebody's been fighting a lot, they'll pull the hairs off of them, so they'll actually look really shiny compared to a regular bee. So that's a sign that that's probably a robber. About as blatant of a sign as wearing a mask, like a caricature of putting a bandana on and going in. So that's a good sign that there's robbing. So yeah, just kind of understand what normal entrance hive activity looks like for your season, and then understanding, again, signs of robbing and stuff like that. To combat robbing, I'd recommend robber screens really what it is it's a plastic kind of 3 sides of a rectangle, if that makes sense, or 5 sides. But it'll be ventilated on the side that's directly to entrance, and then it'll have an entrance gates at the top. Your bees will go in and out of the entrance gates, but the robbers will try to get through the screen. So it's an indication if you have robbers, because they won't know to go up and over. It's a very simple thing, but again, put those on. It usually late summer, whenever your nectar flow stops, that's when robbing is going to start. So put those on until the robbing stops. So I highly recommend those. They're not super expensive, usually about $10, but that is a very necessary thing in some parts of the country. Number 13, the importance of pollen. Now, I mentioned before that pollen is the protein source. When you're doing your inspections, we all like to look at frames that have nectar on them, that are getting capped over and turning to honey. We all like to see that. But when you're doing an inspection, don't neglect to see, to look for and to find pollen. Pollen's actually very interesting to look at. It can be all colors of the rainbow and a little more besides. Very interesting to see what they're pulling in. And you can also see it on the bees, on their back legs. They'll come in and it might be bright yellow, bright orange. I've seen some purples and some whites. It's really cool to see. But you want to specifically look for pollen because that's their protein source. If you don't know, some plants are very nectar heavy, meaning there's a ton of nectar, but they don't actually have a lot of pollen, they don't have a lot of pollen, and vice versa. Some plants are very good pollen sources, but they don't have a lot of nectar. So just because you're seeing nectar coming in doesn't necessarily mean you have pollen, but the young larvae actually need that. The bees will take a little bit of nectar, a little bit of pollen. They make something called bee bread, and that's what they'll feed the young. But after about day 3, the young larvae, so that's what they have. So if they don't have that protein source, it actually is pretty problematic for the development of the hive. So during your investigation and just doing your care of the hive, just make sure you're keeping an eye on how much pollen they have. Now, obviously, they don't need as much pollen as they do honey, but if you're seeing a frame or two in each box of pollen, you're doing fine. But if you're seeing nothing, no pollen, just honey and nectar, that might be an indication that they might need some pollen added in. So just, again, something to keep in mind just to help you have a healthy hive. Number 14, this one's about your smoker. Make sure if you're doing your inspections that you carry extra fuel, whatever you're using for your smoker, and a lighter with you. Don't be the person that you're out there and your smoker runs out of fuel. You got to go run back and grab some more fuel with your hive open, that sort of thing. Just kind of, I always roll up some burlap, put it in my pocket right next to a lighter. As a new beekeeper, your smoker is going to go out. It's totally fine. Nobody's judging. Nobody's going to come out of the woods and be like, oh, gotcha. Yes. So, learn how to light your smoker really well, get it going. I like to make sure when I'm first lighting it that I'm seeing a little bit of flame out of the cylinder. You don't want to have flame coming out the top because you don't want that smoke to be super hot for the bees. But get it going to where it's got a good flame there. When you close it off, it should just kind of go down to a smolder. And that's the trick that's kind of what I use as my gauge. And then once you have that going really well, if you're getting low on fuel, as you'll see when your smoke kind of starts getting thinner, you just pop the lid open, and then you just take a thing out from your pocket, drop it right in, close it up, and keep puffing it a little bit, and it'll keep going. Again, that's more, it's not going to really harm anything if you have to go run back and get smoker fuel. It's more of an irritant than anything, where you're trying to do the rest of your hive and your smoker's not lit and you don't have fuel and stuff like that. So that would just be my recommendation. And if it does go out, again, you have your lighter there, you can just kind of light it up again. So that would just be my recommendation, is keep fuel and a lighter on you. Number 15, and this is probably the most important one for us as beekeepers. Expect that not all your hives are going to make it through the first year. There's a lot of stats from commercial beekeepers, these guys that keep thousands of hives. There's a lot of studies that they keep doing, and I think this past year they were at like 48% survival rate. So if your hives don't make it, it's okay. You're not a failure. there are, lessons to be learned, sure, but just because they died doesn't mean that it was something you did or didn't do. It could be that they got some kind of disease that they couldn't pull through, or that we in Texas, we had that freezing rain 4 or 5 years back that just shut down everything. And I had friends that lost most of their apiaries because it covered them in ice and they couldn't get to them. So, it could be kind of those act of God type things. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It does happen, unfortunately. I would recommend to just keep pushing through it and try to learn what you can from those situations. Figure out if it was something that you didn't do correctly, and just keep going. At the end of the day, they are bugs in a box. We care for them and that sort of thing, but if they don't make it, it doesn't mean you're a failure. Just have that mindset going in, is that expect to lose some, and try to do your best to anything within your power to prevent that, but know that sometimes it is going to be out of your control. Got a couple of bonus ones for you here. The first one up is, if it's your first year with bees, don't expect a huge honey crop that first year. That first year is them building. They're going to be building a ton of wax and stuff like that, and they kind of can do one or the other. They can store all the honey, or they can build a bunch of wax. And obviously in their first year, they don't have all that built out comb to store honey in, so they're going to just try to expand as much as possible. So you're not going to get a huge honey crop that first year necessarily. The next bonus one is, if you're doing inspections and that sort of thing, I would highly recommend not wearing smartwatches or hearing aids or anything that's electronic that gives off some kind of electromagnetic field. Got a kind of a funny story about the hearing aid ones. My father-in-law and we were looking at hives. We weren't even going in them. Usually if the bees are kind enough, you can just walk up to them. We were walking back, so they didn't bother him at all when we were just kind of observing the hive. And we were walking back, and we had some feed jars because we were just replacing feed. And usually they'll just fly around the feed jars, no problem. As he's walking back, they started just going right behind his ear. And the best thing we can figure is that they were going after his hearing aids. So that's just anecdotal. I haven't heard of anything particularly like that, though when he did get his hearing aids, he remembered the nurse saying that they do emit a sound that like dogs and other animals can hear. So maybe the bees can hear that as well. We don't know. And then one of the smartwatch one, I do watch a YouTuber, David Burns is a great resource. I'd recommend following his channel. He has a smartwatch, and if he does his inspections without like gloves or a jacket on, he'll get stung there almost every time if he's got his watch on. So just something to keep in mind. If you have your jacket on, probably not a big deal. But if you're one of these crazy folks that likes going in there with just a hat and veil, yeah, you might want to remove all your smartwatches and stuff like that to prevent from getting stung. So that's pretty much it. Again, thank you all for your time and for watching this video. I hope it helps. If you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put them down below, and I'll get to them. I hope this was helpful for you guys as your new beekeepers, and we're glad to have you in this community. We try to be a very open community and accommodating to newcomers. If you've got any questions, again, I'd highly recommend plugging in with your local counties, Beekeeper Association. Most counties have them. Otherwise, your state or any other organizations like that. Get involved, because beekeepers are some of the most welcoming people I've ever met. If you just say, hey, I'm a new beekeeper, and can I shadow you on one of your inspections? Or, can you help me with this? What's this look like? Take a picture of your hive and be like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. Can you explain it? Beekeepers are some of the most helpful people I've ever met. So I would highly recommend you to just get involved in your community. But anyway, that's all I've got for you guys. Again, if you could like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. This coming year, I'm going to be doing more kind of mission-focused videos, not so much just bee yard walks and inspections, just more I'm going to have a specific topic to cover in these videos coming up. So yeah, if you can just like, subscribe, and help our channel out just by doing that, I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next video.